There has been an exchange of call from the ACT Party to the government.
Thank you, Mr.
Louise
Speaker.
Upston.
I'm pleased to have the opportunity to take a brief call on the second reading of the Alcohol Law Reform Bill. This is a bill that has been debated at length with constituents in my electorate. And I think it's important to bring the perspective back to the debate. And the bill is looking at reducing the harm caused by alcohol as a result of either excessive and or inappropriate consumption of alcohol. We're not talking about the moderate consumption of alcohol that many people that we represent enjoy. So I think it's important that we keep that as a perspective. And there is no expectation that alcohol, when consumed in a moderate way, in a responsible way, is harmful to an individual. So when the Greens member talks about the fact that we could be implementing quite draconian measures that are similar to the smoking legislation that's been passed, I think we need to actually remember that we're talking about two quite different issues in terms of one's health impacts. And it's also quite ironic, Mr. Speaker, that the Greens propose such draconian measures when this is the same party that would want to legalise cannabis. So I do just want to leave on the note, Mr. Speaker, that this is about reducing harm. It's about reducing harm that's caused as a result of either inappropriate or excessive consumption of alcohol. We're not talking about the bulk of New Zealanders and people that we do represent that are quite happy to have a glass of wine or a beer on an odd occasion and be quite sensible and normal in that consumption, Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member Simon Bridges.
Mr. Speaker, one of the greatest professional pleasures and privileges I've had in this Parliament has been dealing with, on the committees I've been on, really significant social issues: tobacco on Māori affairs and alcohol on the Justice Committee. And I've got to say from the outset that alcohol has been an altogether much more complex and multifaceted issue. And one of the reasons for that comes really from a silly little anecdote I suppose I heard some time ago about a congressman who was asked by a constituent to explain his attitude towards whiskey. And he said, "If you mean that demon drink that poisons the mind, pollutes the body, desecrates family life and inflames sinners, then I'm against it," the congressman said. "But if you mean the elixir of Christmas cheer, the shield against winter chill, the taxable potion that puts needed funds into public funds to comfort little crippled children, then I'm for it. This is my position and I will not compromise." And as I say, Mr. Speaker, look, it's a silly little story that I don't intend anyone to take seriously, but it does contain a kernel of truth that really I think much of the media reporting, the public health lobby and many of the speakers have missed. And that's that alcohol fundamentally is neither solely good or solely harmful. And I think the bill that we have made significant changes to, Mr. Speaker, acknowledges and really does grapple and deal with the significant harms. I agree with everything that has been said in this House about the harms in terms of justice, police, health, social, family. There are enormous harms that flow from alcohol. But I think it's also worth bearing in mind, and I think we did as a committee, that for the majority of New Zealanders, actually alcohol is enjoyed moderately and responsibly. And so as a select committee, we took a bill that was already doing a lot to curb harm, and we did more, actually. I think we made some significant and good changes to the bill that is before us now at second reading. But I think to say that the bill is only or was only ever dealing with harms, and that's all we should have focused on, actually would have been an overly simplistic position. And I think the Minister has talked about a pendulum in this area, and I think that's absolutely right. There's a spectrum if you like, with, I think Charles Cheval's words were, laissez-faire on the one side. And that's what we've had since 1989 to some extent. And on the other, actually, I suppose at the extreme, prohibition. And no one was advocating that. We have in this bill swung the pendulum quite some way, more than ever before, indeed, away from liberalisation towards a tougher regime. But I think we've also been mindful of those tensions I've talked about and the need to have an enduring framework. And it's all very well, as some members, Leanne Dalziel is one of them, I think, to say, look, we should have done all these other things. But actually there's tensions involved here, and we needed and we wanted to have an enduring framework that would last the test of time. And I think in this bill we basically have that. I'm not going to go through the select committee changes, Mr. Speaker, over 100 or 130 or thereabouts. Can I thank and acknowledge all members? I think all members engaged constructively, and the officials who did a fantastic job. Can I briefly say on the conscience vote, or the issue of age, which indeed is likely to be a conscience vote? I think my position, perhaps some of others, coming out of the Select Committee, was that actually, it ultimately became a pretty simple issue. I'll be voting to put it to 20, simply because actually that's what the vast majority of people who submitted to us and that I've spoken to all over New Zealand have said they wanted, but also because all of the research that we saw that came to us also pointed that way. Research that effectively from the US said, when the age went up all over the United States, the road toll for 15, 16, 17-year-olds came down, and also that alcohol damages the normal growth and development of a teen's brain. We heard that over and over again, and so I think there are very strong reasons to put it up. But I come back to it, Mr. Speaker, that ultimately we have moved the pendulum, but we've acknowledged the tensions, and Leanne Dalziel says we haven't actually moved the pendulum. Well, Charles Cheval, the member next to her, thought we had. We accept that the other side says not far enough, but we have moved the pendulum. But legislation, I think, like Charles Cheval said, is necessary, but it's not a sufficient condition to getting the change that we needed. Actually, the kind of change that we really need, in addition to this legislation, is, I think, as the Prime Minister said as well, cultural change. Actually, the sort of change that sees parents, I know it's old-fashioned, but being parents, and not trying to be mates to their children who are going out to parties and the like, seeing mates actually being true friends, not just mates, and looking after their mates when they're out. And actually, and I know Leanne Dalziel won't agree with this, but also a good, healthy dose in this country of individual responsibility. Actually, of people acknowledging, she doesn't like it, I said she wouldn't, but actually individual responsibility. So the legislation is a good thing, but we need more, and we need cultural change in this country.
I acknowledge the honourable member.